Please welcome to the stage, from Bank Street Education Center, Tracy Fray-Oliver.
Good morning. Nice to see you. I hope you all enjoyed your break. It's nice to be here today. I'm so excited to be here today to share my reflections from this past year with you. I'm extremely passionate about this work and believe it is doable and it is essential. Not only because it is aligned to the mission of my organization, which I'll tell you about in a bit, but because when I think about all of the work that I've done as an educator that led me to this point, I realize that my passion comes from the various lenses through which I approach this work. A continuous improvement leader, a leader for equity, a former middle school math teacher leader, a woman of color, and a former student, just to name a few. I figured that the best way to start would be to share the two questions that came to mind after I read the Gates Network for School Improvement Strategy. The first was, what if educators all across the country were explicitly and unapologetically focusing their improvement efforts on learning experiences and outcomes for the most marginalized children? What if teachers and school leaders were empowered, given the space, time, resources, and support, to think about how they can better show up and serve the children that have been historically deprioritized in our education system? I wanted to start there because it has been those two questions that have been at the heart of our work and that continue to push me to do things differently, even unlearn some things, to question my approach, to reflect on my impact, and to keep my various identities at the center of what I do. See, this past year has made me even more aware of the various lenses through which I approach the work. In my current role as Senior Associate Vice President at the Bank Street Education Center, I lead the center's work with school districts around the country to improve instruction at scale, informing local practice and addressing some of the nation's most challenging organizational issues. Challenges that often hinder effective and equitable teaching and learning for all students. As a pioneer in early childhood education with deep expertise in how children and adults develop and learn, Bank Street College of Education has been nationally recognized for its commitment to strengths-based, learner-centered, and equitable education practices for over a century now. That is why, in taking on the opportunity to build a network for school improvement focused on improving outcomes for Black, Latinx, and low-income students, we were committed to making sure that our approach was aligned to the college's values and our social justice mission. So that meant, yes, we were going to do data-driven processes to look at the system. We were going to identify root causes, develop change ideas, and run small tests. But it also meant that we were going to bring our understanding of child development and adult learning as a lens, specifically thinking about how these factors intersect with race and culture. I'd like to share some examples of how that played out for us this year. See, our network is based in Yonkers, New York. New York, woo, Yonkers, where you at? Hey, all right, yeah, let's go, come on, people. All right, so when we looked at district data to determine our focus for the work, we saw disproportionate outcomes in middle school math course grades for Black, Latinx, and low-income students. But we knew there was more to the story than what these troubling numbers were telling us. To really understand the district and those we serve, we needed to look at the historical context of the city, and we needed to fix the slide, and we needed to look at the history of the city, but we also needed to put up a mirror to what was happening in its historical context. See, in 1980, a federal judge found out that the city's leaders had intentionally segregated the housing and public school system along the lines of race. And we knew that we would have to hold up a mirror to our network to talk about how that would be part of the conversation. So that meant for us that our approach at looking at the data and seeing the system required us to have a different kind of conversation. As you can imagine, when we put these images up in front of some of our teachers, they had visceral reactions. Many of them remembering what it felt like to be there during a time when there were these types of conversations happening. It became clear to us very quickly that the emotions, mindsets, and beliefs represented in these photos were not something we could consider once and then dismiss. We realized that this was part of the work. We realized that we needed to examine how these beliefs were going to show up in our schools every day, and how they were shaping the processes and decision-making of the adults who were working on behalf of middle schoolers. We also found ourselves examining the district conditions that were either supporting or getting in the way of our efforts. Having sat in a district seat, I am fully aware that there is not always an intentional through line from the district office to the classroom. Here's one example. A few years ago, Yonkers decided to transition to a K-8 model rather than separating elementary and middle schools. An unintended consequence of this decision was that most schools now only had one math teacher on the middle grades. That meant the middle school math teachers rarely had colleagues to have conversations about content with. It meant a large majority of the school-based professional development was elementary focused. As a result, our middle school math teachers have few opportunities to grapple with content together or reflect on their roles in leading the educational development of adolescents, who are in a very different place developmentally than their lower grade children in the building. Through the lens of a math teacher and coach, and you heard it a little earlier today, it was so important for my practice to have my common planning period, where I was able to share a lesson or get feedback from a colleague on my instructional decisions. So seeing the absence of this in a district was heartbreaking for us. So, with a focus on child development, we started to examine the root causes of disproportionality in the district. And it became clear through our conversations with children and adults in the system that the non-cognitive expectations teachers had for 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, wait, I'll say that differently. The expectations that were placed on 11, 12, and 13-year-olds in many cases were inappropriate, considering how adolescents develop, learn, and how their brains work. In some cases, we saw adults condemning kids, and in many cases, their families, for not prioritizing homework or managing their time well, or there were rigid expectations around passively listening to a teacher or copying notes from the board for extended amounts of time and not talking to your peers. Very compliance-oriented. Sometimes holding students to standards that many of us in this room could not meet. I mean, honestly, how many of us will find ourselves off task today, either talking to a neighbor or in your phone or quickly checking emails? I know, just a little bit, but I'm just saying, right? How many of us are gonna find ourselves there? And so we learned pretty quickly that engaging in continuous improvement on behalf of middle school Black, Latinx, and low-income students would mean that we'd have to dig deep into the research and data while also holding the identities of the kids and families we were hoping to serve. Considering these elements of the work all at the same time takes a lot of effort. And it isn't always easy, but this is the work. We don't always get it right, but we recognize that we have to continue to hold ourselves accountable. This brings me to my last lens, and in many ways the most essential. As a student, I held all of these identities. You would check off all of these boxes for me. I am the daughter of immigrants, a Haitian mother, and an Ecuadorian father. Our family was considered low income. I was eligible for free lunch, and lots more. My parents emphasized the importance of an education as the way out. It was going to bring me lots of opportunity and access to the great things that this country had to offer. And it happened to work for me. I mean, I was good at school. I loved school. When I wasn't in school, I was playing school with my sisters. I would read to my dolls, my bears. I really valued school and many of the great learning experiences I had. For example, here is a New York Times article that should be coming up shortly, where I had just had an amazing experience in my 6th grade drama class as part of a gifted and talented program. That's me with those red arrows, right? I'm there, in case you missed me. So where we read Henry VI, and we were asked to write a sequel to the play. In this article, I'm advocating for a democracy rather than the focus on red and white roses. And here's another article where I'm advocating for the possible benefits of school uniforms and how they can be used flexibly for kids, like my younger sister, pictured there with me. She's over me, definitely over me. But it became apparent to me pretty early on, I'd say as early as middle school, that there were going to be some children who got great experiences and other kids who did not. My whole point here is that when I think about why it is I love school so much, it was because I had a set of learning experiences that really stuck with me for the rest of my life. And the truth is, oftentimes, those opportunities are not afforded to all children. Experiences that allow them to develop their understanding of literacy and math in ways that deepen their understanding and stick with them for years. I also learned to navigate school and happened to get access to great enrichment programs and opportunities. Finding myself honestly in mostly white or gifted spaces academically, but then going back to recreational and personal spaces with limited resources and less opportunity, but with people who looked more like me. I remember my excitement reading books like Things Fall Apart and To Kill a Mockingbird in my freshman year of high school. I went to one of my city's specialized high schools. Yeah, these high schools, the ones that are currently in the news due to a lack of diversity and questions around access. Yeah, and I was so excited after reading those books to go home and talk to my friends. And so after a 1-hour commute home, I would get there, and then none of the kids on my block were reading the same books or being exposed to the same types of assignments. When I was stressed over my 11th grade required physics course, not one of my neighborhood friends were even required to take physics to graduate. I was given opportunity to think critically, consider multiple perspectives, think flexibly, and find more than one way to solve a problem. It was critical to my ability to succeed in higher level courses. Oftentimes, as I said earlier, these opportunities are reserved for students who are labeled gifted or attend specialty schools rather than provided to all students. I share these examples from my experience as a student to give you insight into why it is so important that we are investing in and talking about what it means to serve Black, Latinx, and low-income students in our school system. Because as an adolescent, observing, holding, and making sense of those inequities was challenging. even more so than having to navigate the two very different worlds I often found myself in. My hope is that our continuous improvement efforts are going to address these realities for current adolescents, these 11, 12, 13-year-olds. Now, I'll admit this is difficult work to do, and maintaining all of these lenses at the same time can be tough. But that is our charge as adults, privileged enough to do this work. And it's particularly important for those who don't share these lived experiences to do the individual work to help see through those lenses. It is those experiences, the dissonance that I often felt, that makes this work so important to me, just as much as all the compelling data, research, the outcomes, and indicators that you will hear throughout today. I started this talk off with two questions that came to mind as we launched this network. But there is one more question that I'd like to offer you, and that has become front and center for me throughout this year. I want to offer it to you as a consideration and in closing. What if kids who look like me, who live like I did, who dare to dream even bigger than I could ever imagine, what if they didn't have to work so hard to navigate school and access opportunity because there were adults like all of us, full of purpose and doing the work to fulfill the promise of an equitable education for them? Thank you.